To make it easy to vote and hard to cheat, Tim. That's my rule.
Justice Beasley, 30 seconds, rebuttal.
You know, it is absolutely not true that I've been encouraging riots. I have served as a judge in North Carolina for over 20 years, and I've upheld the rule of law. I would never encourage rioting, and Congressman Budd knows that. And so it's also important that we have a senator who's going to be willing to tell the truth. North Carolinians deserve the truth about all of these issues that are very important to them and for all of our lives.
Okay, the next question will focus on immigration and the border. Ms. Beasley, how would you assess the situation on our southern border currently? NBC News reports the Biden White House is considering an emphasis on the immigration system after the midterms. So what is your specific plan on changes that you would support and you think Congress needs to pass? 90 seconds.
You know, Washington has dropped the ball on immigration. And Republicans and Democrats agree that our immigration system needs fixing. And we must secure our border and reform the system. And we can pass policies that reflect our values to keep communities safe and build a strong economy and certainly make sure that we're upholding our American values in the American dream. But let's be clear. There are some folks who should not be in this country. And so reform means that we absolutely must secure the border. It also means that we should make available to farmers visas so that they can have the agricultural help that they need, that they tell me that they need. And we also must have a clear pathway to citizenship for dreamers and for those who serve honorably in the military. But since Republicans and Democrats agree, why hasn't something been done? Because politicians like Congressman Budd are doing nothing to address this crisis. We need real solutions, and the folks who are being hurt are our small business people and our farmers. And they're the ones who are speaking with one voice that we need solutions. And Congressman Budd has been in Congress for 6 years. And what makes us think he's going to do something in the next 6?
Would you assess the situation at the border right now as a crisis?
We need immigration reform, and the border needs to be fixed, and we absolutely must secure the border. It is the right thing to do. And the only way to truly reform immigration is to secure the border.
Is it a crisis?
It is imperative. I mean, it's unfair to all of us. And that the border is not secure, and it's unfortunate that we see migrants and immigrants used as pawns and an issue where folks who've been elected need to sit down and come together and come to a solution. We have to secure the border. But speaking in the way of sending migrants here and there is not the way to solve this very critical issue that Congressman Budd has had every opportunity to address.
Mr. Budd, you have made this a focal point in your campaign. I heard along the campaign trail talk about fentanyl coming across chaotic open borders in your terms, as you called it. So what is your plan to help this situation at the border, and when would you consider it secure?
Thanks, Tim, and I'd like to congratulate my very worthy opponent on adopting the concerns for the border. I've not heard that before. So what I've seen in multiple trips to the border is that we have had, since Joe Biden has been in office, and she's clearly supported his policies, we've had 3.5 million people come across the border illegally. Those are just the ones they've apprehended. The known gotaways, not including the unknowns, it's 500,000 individuals since Joe Biden has been in office. And about 80, and that number is growing, are on the terrorist watch list, Tim. They're not from Mexico. They're from some of the 200, some of the most dangerous countries around the world. So when I was down there, and I was in the pickup truck with the off-duty Border Patrol agents, who, by the way, the National Border Patrol Council, they endorse me because they know that I support them. And we're looking at construction material which had just lain there since January 20th when Biden was inaugurated. Idle construction equipment just sitting there since Biden had been inaugurated. It stopped. They said, yeah, we need to finish the wall. And by the way, they had just arrested 2 cartel members coming across. And they said, we need to build this wall, but what we really need is an administration that has our back. And right now, they said, we don't have an administration that has our back. So whether it's law enforcement there or whether it's law enforcement here, I want to have their back. That's why they endorse me. We can know, Tim, because what happened in California when they put up a wall around San Diego, The illegal crossings were over, the reduction was over 90%, Tim. So that's what we need to do.
Are you still in support of the Trump wall?
Look, I don't care what you call it, but I am in support of a wall. It is not the whole solution, but it is a large part of the solution. I'm also, rather than having 87,000 IRS agents, which my opponent would support through the recent legislation, this so-called Green New Deal or the Inflation Recovery or Inflation Reduction Act, that's got 87,000 IRS agents. I think we need 87,000 more border agents. So yes, we need a wall. Yes, we need more border agents. And yes, we need technology. It's going to take all of it. And it's going to take an administration, Tim, that has law enforcement's back at the border.
Ms. Beasley, rebuttal for 30 seconds.
You know, the bottom line is that actions speak louder than words. And Congressman Budd has done nothing on this issue to work across the aisle to try to make this fixed. We must secure the border. But the reality is he's all talking about IRS agents when the bottom line on that is that his company, as family's company, after stiffing farmers to the tune of more than $50 million, failed to pay their taxes. And that's not right.
Mr. Budd, 30-second rebuttal.
No, look, I think she's referring to a publicly traded company that I never even worked for, so obviously she's desperate for some facts, and perhaps she should talk with her fact checkers on her own team. But look, I've always supported law enforcement, and I am talking about IRS agents because I think that is a missed priority. We need to have 87,000 more border agents at our border, and that would probably be a good start because, yes, we need to finish the wall, and when we put up legislation, we would get zero Democrat support. I've got a long history of working across the aisle. And I would love to do that on issues with the border because to get big things done, I would love to be able to work across the aisle and have some reasonable folks, and there's a few on the other side that we can still work with.
All right,
Tim, this myth about the IRS agents has already been debunked. It is absolutely not true. It's not been a part of any legislation.
All right, let's go to the next question. This one just came up yesterday. The Biden administration announced it would pardon people convicted of simple marijuana possession under federal law, urging governors to do the same. And he's also asking officials to review how marijuana is scheduled under federal law. Do you agree with this decision? And what is your ideal law in terms of the legalization of marijuana in any form, if at all? Mr. Budd, we start with you on this one. 90 seconds.
Look, I'm not a supporter of legalization, especially for recreational marijuana. If someone can prove to me that there is a medical case for marijuana, we can certainly have that discussion. But what you see with this, Tim, is just some of the most awful ideas, because the conversation we just had a moment ago was about illegal drugs, human trafficking coming across our borders as sent by the cartel. And they're making money hand over fist at the expense of Americans, especially men, young men, 18 to 45 years old that are dying because of what's coming across our border. I live in Davie County, right next door in Iredell County. In one traffic stop, there was enough fentanyl in that stop to kill 250,000 people. Why would our president, who my opponent would be a complete rubber stamp for, why would our president want more drugs to be coming across our border? I think that is a bad message. It sends a bad message to our children.
So you don't support the pardoning these individuals and changing the law at all? I
think it's probably outside of his constitutional authority, and I think it sends a very bad message to our children. And why would you want to give amnesty to those who have broken our laws and encourage even more law breaking and encourage even more drugs and perhaps even embolden the cartels even more? I think it's bad all around.
Ms. Beasley, same question to you.
You know, I've not seen a full report of what the president intends, but I think it's worth looking at for sure. And I know that that one of the ways in which as I think I understand it, is that he's talking about low-level offenses of marijuana, that he's not talking about fentanyl. But you know, Congressman Budd has had every opportunity to fund law enforcement and to the tune of more than $32 million. And part of that would have been addressing the opioid crisis. And so there's an opportunity to have done that. But I certainly have been very clear, even as the former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, that I support legalizing cannabis. There is a great opportunity as we think about ways in which to reform the criminal justice system to address for disparities in sentencing and also to get people back to work. A lot of employers right here in North Carolina, to include with the North Carolina Chamber of Commerce, want to know that workers can get back to work. They want folks they don't want criminals. They want folks who have low levels, low offenses to be able to get back to work. And so I certainly support that. I also know that there's a real opportunity for our farmers to be able to diversify their crops. And so there are a whole host of reasons that legalizing cannabis can work very well here in North Carolina.
Do you mean medicinal, recreational, or both?
Yes.
Yes to both?
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Budd, did you want 30 seconds for rebuttal?
I think that sends a horrible message to our young people. One of the inflationary aspects, one of the things that's driving inflation right now, Tim, is a worker shortage. We need more people. That's why we have solutions like H2A to bring more people here to serve on and help on our farms. Very important people. But we need people to drive trucks. We need people to work in warehouses. We need people to be the next generation of folks that can make this country great again. But one of the things we're seeing is so many of them can't even pass a drug test. When a party wants to eliminate and ban menthol, and now they're on the same time they're trying to, they're trying to legalize recreational marijuana and encourage that for our young people. I think that's completely the wrong direction.
Ms. Beasley, 30 seconds if you'd like it.
You know, cannabis is legal in lots of states. And we have to think about where we are as a country and as a society. It is important for people to be able to get back to work. There are a host of reasons why we should legalize cannabis. I look forward to seeing more about this proposed legislation, proposed rule by the president. But it is important that we stand firm in understanding the benefits of legalizing cannabis and what it can do here in North Carolina.
All right, thank you very much. You alluded to part of this next question in one of your last answers. Our next question is going to focus on a couple of the ads that our viewers are seeing a lot of. So I wanted to give both of you the opportunity to respond to some of these ads. Ms. Beasley, one ad says you believe sex offenders with multiple offenses should not be required to have lifelong GPS monitoring. Another case where a murderer's case was vacated. Why are those ads unfair and incorrect?
Well, I've not seen those, but I've certainly heard about them. And the reality is Congressman Budd and his national Republican allies are spending millions of dollars to attack my judicial record. And it is a distortion. We know that some of the ads came down earlier on because they were just completely not true. And it's a sense of desperation to spend that kind of money and to make up these kinds of stories when I guess they know we really can win this race and they can lose. But it seems to me that the voters here in North Carolina really do care a whole lot about integrity. And they want to know that the next senator is going to be truthful with them about what's happening. And these ads are not true, and it's a real distortion and a real, I think, disservice to folks here in North Carolina. My ad in particular around biotech is true, about Congressman Budd's family that owned a seed company, and they left farmers and other folks holding the bag in the amount of more than $50 million while taking $10 million for themselves and filing bankruptcy thereafter. Well, that's wrong. And that is an issue of integrity, and North Carolinians deserve better than that. And so I know that what Congressman Budd is doing is not working for North Carolina.
Mr. Budd, the part I was going to talk to you, she just said, so I won't say that. I'll just let you start with your 90 seconds.
Look, I think she's talking about some publicly traded company in the late 90s, early 2000s that I never even worked for. So perhaps she should do a little more homework. But what I do know that she has, thrown out indictments for sex offenders. She's defended cop killers. But look, don't take my word for it. Take law enforcement organizations, which at one point, Tim, they had supported Ms. Beasley, but now they have supported me. The North Carolina Troopers Association once supported Ms. Beasley, and now they're supporting me. The Police Benevolent Association once supported Ms. Beasley, and now they're supporting me. The North Carolina Fraternal Order of Police, Tim, they once supported Ms. Beasley, and now they're supporting me. So I would just like to say, don't take my word for it. If she has a trust issue with me, look, it's campaign season. Campaigns are tough. I get it. But at the same time, we want to be truthful. So why don't we trust these organizations which really know Ms. Beasley, and they know me, and they decided to endorse me.
Ms. Beasley, 30 seconds for rebuttal.
This is not just some publicly traded company. This is a Budd family company. And it seems to me to renounce responsibility for what happens when people are suffering and left holding the bag is just absolutely wrong. I'm very grateful that I've been endorsed by sheriffs and law enforcement officers all across the state, many of whom I worked with over the years as a judge, holding violent offenders accountable and keeping our community safe. And so these are trustworthy relationships, and I'm very thankful that we're in a place where we're going to stand on what's really important for folks here in North Carolina, and we're also going to stand on the truth.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Budd. 30 seconds.
Look, again, I would go back to those that know Ms. Beasley and those that know me. The North Carolina Fraternal Order of Police, the Police Benevolent Association, the North Carolina Troopers Association. Those are ones that had once endorsed her. And by and large, these are statewide organizations. And now they're supporting me. So I encourage your viewers to go out to their website and take a look at why they supported me. Read their press releases. Look at their history with Ms. Beasley, including throwing out indictments for sex offenders and defending cop killers. Again, I would take their word for it and not Ms. Beasley's.
This leads into our next question about crime and guns, something that we also heard about on the campaign trail a lot. Mr. Budd, you have talked extensively on the campaign trail about crime, how neighborhoods have turned to battlefields, as you called it, on the campaign trail. So what is your plan to combat that? And also, do you support any kind of gun reform at all? 90 seconds.
Well, the goal with firearms is to protect our Second Amendment while keeping them out of the hands of dangerous individuals, whether it's those with criminal backgrounds or criminal intent, or if they're under a Form 50B. Or they have been mentally adjudicated. We have to keep firearms out of the hands of those. So again, I think that's what we need to do there. But with crime, I don't connect it just to what's happening in our neighborhoods. I connect it to the border as well. Because what law enforcement is telling me, Tim, is that 72 hours from crossing our border, that fentanyl, those drugs, those cartel members, they're right here in our neighborhoods. Sheriffs, law enforcement individuals are coming up to me around the state, and I've heard this in multiple places, said slightly different ways, Tim. And they say that every single county in North Carolina is now a border county because of Joe Biden's policies. And those policies, those are policies that Ms. Beasley would support, and that leads to the chaos at the border, that leads to the chaos in our neighborhood. We're seeing crime spikes in some areas of 60%. We got to treat cops like the heroes that they are. We can't have defunding, like my opponent has done fundraising with the leader of the defund the police movement. That sends a bad signal to our law enforcement. And Tim, perhaps that's one reason why organizations which once knew her, now they know her even better, and now they're supporting me.
Ms. Beasley, he has said you will defund the police. I know in other things I've read that you have said you will not. Your opponent also continues to call you soft on crime. You did talk about gun laws that you'd like to see changed on the campaign trail when I was out with you. So what are some of those? 90 seconds.
You know, I have served as a judge for 2 decades, and as Chief Justice, I have worked with law enforcement. I've held violent offenders accountable. My cases have been upheld to 98%, and I created the first human trafficking drug court in North Carolina, human trafficking court here in North Carolina. The first thing we absolutely must do is fund the police. I do not support defunding the police. I don't raise money with anybody who is supporting defund the police. We must fund the police to make sure that they have the resources that they need to keep themselves and our community safe. We also must invest in community-based violence intervention programs to stop the cycle of violence. Congressman Budd, who talks about being a friend of the police, on 4 separate occasions voted against funding for police here in North Carolina to the tune of more than $32 million. And talking about crime, I mean, the folks who were rioting the Capitol, who stormed and endangered hundreds of law enforcement officers who were injured and killed, I mean, Congressman Budd is really all talk. He's not trying to keep us safe. He's just talking. Actions really do speak louder than words, and Congressman Budd is not working for North Carolina.
Mr. Budd, 30-second rebuttal if you'd like, sir.
I've been very clear to denounce violence in all its forms and all its places, whether it's burning just around the corner here in Raleigh in riots, or whether it's in Washington, D.C. We don't want any of it, and I believe that we need justice everywhere. When it comes to Second Amendment, which is the origin of your question, we need to protect the Second Amendment while keeping firearms out of the hands of dangerous individuals. And I'll also add that one thing I did was support Fix NICS, which is the National Instant Criminal Background Check Service that I voted and to fund more to upgrade the database so that we know who the dangerous folks are, including those that are mentally adjudicated, and we keep them out of their hands.
30 seconds for rebuttal. And did you want gun reform changes?
You know, I certainly agree with the bipartisan legislation that was passed on gun safety. It's a great start, and we do have to do more. Senators Burr and Tillis and law enforcement supported this legislation, and Congressman Budd voted against it. He calls police officers heroes, and they really are. But he's also voted against funding them. And did he think that the heroes at the Capitol who were injured and killed by this mob that he called patriots, were those law enforcement officers heroes, and did they also deserve the protection and the funding? Congressman Budd really does not speak consistently with how he acts.
All right, let's go to the next question. The military is obviously part of the fabric here of North Carolina, so I want to ask a foreign affairs question, especially with news last night out of Washington. We have the ongoing war in Ukraine. Last night, President Biden referring to Russia, saying the risk of nuclear Armageddon is the highest since the Cuban Missile Crisis. Trouble continues with China, and just this week, North Korea sent a missile over Japan. What concerns you the most about foreign affairs at the moment, and what should the United States be doing about it, if anything? Ms. Beasley, we'll start with you.
You know, my husband Kurt and I raised our twin sons in Fayetteville at Fort Bragg and in the neighborhoods of Fort Bragg. And we have lots of friends and been in communities with military families and know the sacrifices that they make and that the service members make, that their families make, and the impact that it has on our communities. I'm so deeply sorry about the atrocities that we are seeing in Ukraine and how those folks over there are suffering, and it is just wrong. I know it's really important that we continue to stand with our allies. It's important to continue to impress these sanctions on Russia and hold them accountable. We cannot have nuclear war. We just can't. And that's why it's important that this country remain the leader of the world. That's why it's important that we hold Russia accountable. That's why it's important that we make sure that China is accountable for its human rights violations, but also keep a watch on what's happening with them on their nuclear efforts and every other state or non-state across the world. It is imperative that our national security folks keep us advised of what's happening, because we really have to keep abreast, whether we're talking about Iran or anywhere else. I mean, so much of the national security and global security really does rely on what we do here in North Carolina.
Do you agree with the president's assessment that this is the closest to nuclear Armageddon since the Cuban Missile Crisis?
Well, these are certainly some very difficult times for Ukraine and for other parts of the world. And what I do know is that we've got to be steadfast. We've got to stand with our allies. We've got to be vigilant. We've got to be serious. We've got to be tough. And we do have to make sure that we're creating policies that don't sacrifice who we are and jeopardize our own national security. Congressman Budd talks a whole lot about national security, but he's done nothing. I mean, he praises Putin, one who's putting Ukraine in danger, and it's just wrong.
Mr. Budd, your 90 seconds.
So we have 6 major installations here. It's the second largest industry in our state. It's so important to us. But beyond that, we need American strength to prevent these problems so that Joe Biden on a bad night doesn't make more foolish and irresponsible comments like he did just the other night, if not last night. This started back in Afghanistan about 13 or 14 months ago, and our hearts were broken when we Americans, we lost 13 Marines because of Joe Biden's botched withdrawal from Afghanistan. And what that did, Tim, is it signaled to the world that America was not going to be strong, it was going to be weak. And so not only did that cause problems in Ukraine, in Russia, that caused problems with Iran, that caused problems with North Korea, testing an intermediate range missile out into the sea. That caused problems with China being aggressive and saber rattling towards, in the South China Sea towards Taiwan. So the problems with being weak, as Biden is, and as Ms. Beasley would double down on those policies of Joe Biden, that leads to these other problems. So these things should have never, ever happened. And I lay them at the feet of an irresponsible, perhaps even incompetent Joe Biden for endangering us, even with his comments last night, Tim.
So I believe you called them foolish, so you don't agree with his assessment?
Look, I don't. And even if he thought it, those are things to keep to oneself, and you work to prevent it. But again, you don't need to make comments and loose comments like that. You need to be very careful as president or as the next U.S. Senator with how you speak about international relationships.
Ms. Beasley, if you want 30 seconds to rebuttal.
You know, the signal to the world actually came under President Trump. as he was cozying up to Putin and knowing that Russia was interfering in our elections, and also now we see what they've done to Ukraine, and they're a real threat to democracy. And so with Congressman Budd aligning himself with Donald Trump, that's completely dangerous. And as I think about threats to democracy, that certainly is one of them. We can't trust Congressman Budd to do what he needs to do to keep us safe here in North Carolina.
Mr. Budd, 30 seconds if you'd like it, sir.
Well, thank you. Under the prior president, again, not only was inflation at 1.4%, and you could also buy groceries and gas in the same week, Iran was in check. Putin and Russia were in check. China was in check. It was not being aggressive. And so was North Korea. So, again, regardless of what you think about the prior president, we were much more stable, including the Abraham Accords in the Middle East, and building great relationships not only with the U.S., but other Middle Eastern countries with our ally Israel. So again, we need to be America strong where those good things happen, not Putin weak, like Ms. Beasley would be a rubber stamp for, that leads to this international chaos that we're seeing right now.
All right, we need to move on to the next question. It is healthcare. Obviously, healthcare is and always will be a big issue for everyone. This question actually comes from several viewers. Got a number of questions about this. What do you support in terms of the future of healthcare, in terms of Medicare, the Medicaid gap, and broadly the future of the Affordable Care Act and affordability? For this one, we start with you, Mr. Budd.
Again, I want to begin by fully supporting any scenario that leads to low-cost, high-quality health care for all individuals. And what we see with a Bernie Sanders type approach to Medicare, he wants to give that Medicare to all, which would take and destroy what our seniors have and what they've worked for, and dilute it among everyone. And so it would destroy a workable system where we're in a country where 80% of individuals are getting their health care from a good, high-paying job with good benefits. That's where people need to get theirs from. Not some sort of Medicare for all scenario, but we need to have high innovation, transparency, choice that leads to low cost and high quality for all individuals. And that's the framework that I would support, Tim.
One other question I got specifically for you was if you would continue to vote to repeal the Affordable Care Act.
Well, Tim, that's been 10, 12 years. You know, the individual mandate has already been repealed. But I will look at anything that makes life better for us here in North Carolina. I get people being in the U.S. Congress that call my office each and every day, and they say, how can I pay my Obamacare premiums that are going up and up and up when it's more than I and my family make? It's ridiculous. It hasn't worked. And anything that I'm going to do in regards to health care makes things better for us here in North Carolina, when everything that Joe Biden, Obama before him, has made life harder and worse for us here in North Carolina.
Ms. Beasley, 90 seconds.
You know, I'm a mom of twin sons, and we knew from the moment of their birth that they had medical conditions that will require lots of surgeries and lots of treatments. And just imagine being a new mom and being happier than ever and also very tired, but then fighting insurance companies. And we were fighting insurance companies, and we're still fighting insurance companies to make sure that our sons can get the care that they need, like so many other families in North Carolina. And it doesn't have to be that way. We certainly know that it's important to have the expanded ACA with a public option and allowing people to be able to have their pre-existing conditions covered, which Congressman Budd doesn't want, and also making sure that Medicare really can negotiate drug prices down to include covering generics as well. We have over 1 million diabetics in North Carolina, and while some of them, to include some seniors, can be covered and insulin capped, some folks can't. And everybody in North Carolina needs that. And so Congressman Budd has voted against capping the cost of insulin over 4 different times. I mean, we need a senator who understands that folks here in North Carolina really are struggling, that healthcare costs are way too expensive, and it really is dipping into people's everyday lives. We need somebody we can count on, and Congressman Budd has shown us that we can't.
Viewer wanted to ask you specifically, too, if you support at all Medicare for all.
I support expanding the ACA with a public option. I certainly hate that North Carolina is one of the 12 states in the country that has not expanded Medicaid. I hope we will do that. More than 500,000 people here in this state will have medical coverage. But we need to do what's right by North Carolina.
So is that a no for Medicare for all?
It means that I support expanding the ACA with a public option.
Mr. Budd, 30 seconds for rebuttal.
Well, that was quite a sidestep, because the public option which she's speaking about and the way she's speaking about it would destroy the benefits for our seniors who've worked their whole lives to get there. And so, again, that's very, very dangerous, because economically it would be unsustainable if the rest of the population was rolled into what our seniors rightly deserve. But when it comes to negotiating our drugs, not just insulin, including insulin, of course, because we have so many friends that are needed that on a daily and multiple times daily basis. But what we need is to be able to negotiate with all drugs and about all drug prices, which would allow innovation to continue and not just single out a few winners and losers when it comes to drugs.
Ms. Beasley, 30 seconds if you'd like it.
You know, folks need health care. I'm traveling all across all of our 100 counties, and folks talk about the pain at the pump, the cost of prescription drugs, the cost of health care, and folks need access to health care. It's the right thing to do. And so many people, particularly in our rural communities, cannot have access to health care, whether it is by proximity, because they're driving an hour and a half or more from where they live to get it, or the cost. And this is cost prohibitive, and it's just not right.
All right, so time for one last full question. This one is related and somewhat. I also heard from seniors on the issue of Social Security and entitlement programs. What do you support in terms of the future of Social Security in light of the concern of the future of funding them? And what would you tell a young person in future generations about what they should expect? For this one, we start with you, Ms. Beasley.
You know, I believe that seniors deserve to retire in dignity. And folks have made quite a contribution to North Carolina. It's the right thing to do. We need to make sure that Social Security is stable, that we allow Medicare to also cover hearing and vision and dental, and that these diabetics who are living here in North Carolina can have their expenses capped. You know, Congressman Budd has been very clear that he is not going to at all adhere to these kinds of policies that people here in North Carolina expect. I mean, he's voted against lowering the cost of drugs while also taking corporate PAC money from Big Pharma. And so in my mind, that really does infringe on where people are and what they deserve. He also supports destabilizing Social Security and probably getting rid of it, as well as Medicare. We need to make sure that seniors work hard, they can get what they've paid into, and they can get what they deserve. And if we have the right kind of Senate, and I'm asking folks to sort of vote for me, young people can count on that as well.
So how do we go about that then?
Well,
preserving Social Security.
No, we do. We need to do that, but we certainly can't. How would we, Tim, say to folks, you know, you've paid into this, you deserve to retire into dignity. We can do this. We can absolutely do it and make sure that folks have what they deserve. Secure Social Security in a way to make sure that folks who pay in can get what they need and what they deserve.
Mr. Budd, your 90 seconds.
Tim, thank you. I want to say to all those who are nearing receiving benefits or who are on benefits, and they've come up in these 100 counties when I'm out around the state and continuing to travel across the state. And they said, will you protect Social Security, Medicare, and benefits? And it's not just those who are on it, but those who are near to receiving it. So I want to vow to them that I have not, nor will I, touch those benefits for those who are receiving them or who are near to receiving them. But the most stabilizing thing, she talks about destabilizing them. Let me tell you what destabilizes Social Security. That's inflation. 40-year inflation that Joe Biden has given us, 8.3% when we had 1.4% under the prior administration. That destabilizes it. So the best thing we could do, let's get down inflation and let's get folks back to work and let's get folks paying into this so that not only will they be able to receive it, but our seniors who are receiving it, it will be safe for them for the duration of their life. So the worst thing that we could do is allow Joe Biden's policies to continue. And those are the policies that would keep going and be doubled down on and rubber stamped under Sherry Beasley.
So those are the seniors. What about young people? What should they expect under your plan for Social Security?
Well, I say let's get in, let's get good paying jobs that pays in, and not only does it stabilize it for the current seniors who are probably their parents or perhaps their grandparents, but it would also be there for them, and they can protect that in the future.
Do you support privatizing or getting rid of it or anything like she just said you would?
That's never even been legislation that I've even looked at.
Ms. Beasley, 30 seconds for rebuttal.
That's quite a switcheroo. Congressman Budd does support doing away with Social Security, or at least capping it for a 5-year term or whatever that is. But it's wrong. It's wrong for seniors. It's wrong for hardworking young people who are paying into the system and deserve to also be able to retire with dignity. But he's talking about destabilizing. You can't on the one hand say you want to stabilize, but then be taking corporate PAC money when you've had the opportunity to lower the cost of gas and drugs. I mean, that's disingenuous, and people can see through that.
Mr. Budd, 30 seconds.
Look, the worst thing we have right now is 40-year inflation from Joe Biden. And those are policies that Sherry Beasley would absolutely support. That throws the numbers off, so it not only in just a few years, Social Security would be able to pay for those who are on it, it wouldn't be able to pay for those who are near term to receiving it. So what we need to do, we lower inflation, we roll back regulations, we grow the American economic engine. We've done this before, we can do it again. It's not going to happen under Joe Biden, and it won't happen under Ms. Beasley. Before we get to closing statements, we don't have time for an answer on this, just a yes or no, because I got a lot of questions about the filibuster. Do you support keeping the filibuster or no?
Eliminating.
Mr. Budd? Keeping it.
All right, there you go. It is time for closing statements. As we said in the rules, each candidate will have 90 seconds to make their closing statements. Ms. Beasley, you are first.
Tim, thank you so much for having me, and thank you all so much for being here this evening. You know, my grandfather left Alabama with 76 cents in his pocket with a dream for his family to make sure we could have a better future. My husband Kurt and I are the very proud parents of twin sons who are working so hard for the American dream, like so many families here in North Carolina. And so what this is really about is you and your family and who will work for you. We need to have safe communities. We need to support our farmers and our small businesses. We need to make sure that there's an advocate for us fighting for our rights in the Senate. And we also need to make sure that people can live a safe, healthy, and productive life. We need good paying jobs and we need a strong economy, and we absolutely must lower costs. Congressman Budd won't do any of that because he hasn't. He hasn't voted to support law enforcement to keep our community safe. He won't support lowering the cost of prescription drugs or oil or any other costs. And he will not, absolutely will not support our farmers or protect our rights. North Carolina deserves a senator who's going to represent all of us, who's going to represent one North Carolina. I've been so honored to serve North Carolinians for the last nearly 30 years as public defender, judge, and Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. My commitment to you is to serve you and serve you well. Thank you.
Ms. Beasley, thank you. Mr. Budd, your 90 seconds.
Tim, again, thank you for hosting the spirited conversation tonight. Ms. Beasley, thank you for being here as well. It's been an honor. Look, about 65 to 70% of North Carolinians believe that our country, our state is on the wrong track. And we talk a lot about tonight about Joe Biden. Why am I doing that? Because Joe Biden is on the ballot on November 8th. And he goes by the name this year of Sherry Beasley, because she would be an absolute rubber stamp for everything that's led to this country being on the wrong track. Whether that's inflation and having to choose this week between groceries or your power bill or back to school clothes for your kids. Look, you shouldn't have to make those tough decisions, but you are because of Joe Biden's policies, what they have been and what Sherry Beasley would support. Whether it comes to crime, if it's at our borders and the fentanyl and the human trafficking coming across, or a few days later being right here in our counties in North Carolina, it's all connected. And those are policies that Sherry Beasley would do everything that Joe Biden has done, leading to this runaway chaos. Or perhaps you're concerned about education and you just want to say in your kids' education, while Joe Biden is out there and his administration is calling parents domestic terrorists. Look, we can bring a stop to this, and I would like to ask for your prayers and your support and your vote on November 8th, because Joe Biden's policies are on the ballot, and I'd like to bring a stop to that, and that's why I'm running, to make your life better. May God bless you, and good night.
Thank you, everybody, for watching. Appreciate both of you being here. That does it for our Spectrum News 1 U.S. Senate debate. Thanks to both Representative Budd and Judge Beasley for participating tonight. Don't forget, North Carolina's voter registration deadline is October 14th. Early in-person voting starts 6 days later on the 20th and runs through November 5th. And, of course, Election Day is November 8th. Again, thanks for tuning in. Have a great night.
Good
Good evening. I'm Loretta Beniti. You just saw what is set to be the only U.S. Senate debate between Cheri Beasley and Ted Budd right here exclusively on Spectrum News 1. The past hour left us with a lot to analyze and break down. We're welcoming back our experts to get their first reactions. We're joined again by Dr. Scott Huffman of Winthrop University, Dr. Susan Roberts of Davidson College, and our own Spectrum News 1 Washington reporter, Ruben Jones. So I'll start with you. Was this what you were expecting from this debate?
Well, I would give it, a B+. I think it started out very lively. Cheri Beasley came out with some energy and some fire, and I think she set the tone for the rest of the debate. I think I was a little confused on some of the answers, especially Ted Budd did not explain how radical the Women's Health Protection Act was, and I don't know why he included Milton Friedman, the economist, in his remarks several times. But I thought it was spirited. I thought maybe people would learn something. I think it would leave them with some questions. Say, what is this act? And I will say this, I think Budd did a very good job saying, go back and look at the record about the law enforcement, the troopers, because I think that might have made someone come like, I don't know what that act is, and then I don't know what he means about the troopers. Maybe what's the truth there? So I think it raised some questions for voters to think about.
I'll ask you also, what was your first impression from this?
Well, there were several awkward moments, which I think we all expected. Neither one of them, we expected a huge show of charisma, and both of them, gave their awkward moments. But as Susan said, they both also had some really good points that they got to land on one and the other. Ted Budd was sort of backpedaling when he's talking about the women's health, when he's naming laws that people are not familiar with, and he's using the name that people use to make them sound good. He's really not helping himself. But when he says things like, these troopers, they know her, they know me, and they chose me. Of course,